Try anyway. I am Lady Rain, and this is the Reader's Nook. Puppy wants attention, so, well, she's not the puppy, but she's still my puppy. She's 4 now. Pomsky just turned 5. She is 7 months younger. You wouldn't know it because she's bigger. All right, chapter 53 of The Stand. Excerpts from the meetings of the Ad Hoc Committee, August 17th, 1990. So this is the day before the big giant meeting that they're going to have. This meeting was held at the home of Larry Underwood on South 42nd Street at the Table Mesa in the Table Mesa area. All members of the committee were present. The first item of business concerned having the ad hoc committee elected as the permanent Boulder committee. Francis Goldsmith was recognized. Fran. Both Stu and I agreed that the best, easiest way for us all to get elected would be if Mother Abigail endorsed the whole slate. It would save us the problem of having 20 people nominated by their friends and possibly upsetting the apple cart. But now we'll have to do it another way. I'm not going to suggest anything that isn't perfectly democratic, and you all know the plan anyway. But I just want to reemphasize that each of us has to make sure we have someone who will nominate and second us. We won't do it for each other, obviously. That would look too much like the mafia. And if you can't find one person to nominate you and another to second you, might as well give up anyway. Susie, wow, that's sneaky, Fran. Fran, yes, it is a little. Glenn, we're edging back into the subject of the community's morality. And although I'm sure we all find that an endlessly fascinating topic, I'd like to see it tabled for the next few months. I think we just have to agree that we're serving in the free zone's best interest and leave it at that. Ralph. You sound a little pissed, Glenn. Glenn, I am a little pissed. I admit it. The fact that we've spent so much time eating at our own livers on the subject should give a pretty good indication as to where our hearts are. Sue. The road to hell is paved with, Glenn, good intentions, yes. And since we all seem so worried about our intentions, we must surely be on the highway to heaven. Glenn then said he had intended to address the committee on the subject of our scouts or spies, or whatever you want to call them, but that he wanted to make a motion instead that we meet to discuss that on the 19th. Stu asked him why. Glenn, because we might not be here on the 19th. Somebody might get voted out. It's a remote possibility, but no one really knows what a large group of people is going to do when they get all together in one place. We ought to be careful as we can. That was good for a moment of silence, and the committee voted 7-0 to meet on the 19th as the permanent committee to discuss the question of scouts or spies or whatever. Stu was recognized to put a third item of business before the committee concerning Mother Abigail. Stu, as you know, she's gone off for reasons of her own. Her note says she'll be gone for a while, which is pretty vague, and that she'll be back if it's God's will. Now, that's not very encouraging. We've had search parties out for 3 days now, and we haven't found a thing. We don't want to just drag her back, not if she doesn't want to come. But if she's lying up somewhere with a busted leg, or if she's unconscious, that's a lot different. Now, part of the problem is that there just aren't enough of us to search all the wild lands around here. But another part of it is the same thing that's slowing us down on the power station. There's just no organization. So, what I'm looking for is permission to put in search parties on the agenda for the big meeting tomorrow night, as on the power station and the burial crew. And I'd like to see Harold Lauder in charge because it was his idea in the first place. Glenn said he didn't think any search party was going to find any good news for a week or so. After all, the lady in question is 108 years old. Committee as a whole agreed with that, and then voted in favor of the motion, 7-0, as Stu put it. To make this record as honest as possible, I should add that there were several expressions of doubt over putting Harold in charge. But as Stu pointed out, it had been his idea to begin with, and not to give him command of the search party would be a direct slap in the face. Nick, I withdraw my objection to Harold, but not my basic reservations. I just don't like him very much. Ralph Brittner asked if either Stu or Glenn would write out Stu's motion about the search party so he could add it to the agenda, which he plans to print at the high school tonight. Stu said he'd be glad to. Larry Underwood then moved that we adjourn. Ralph seconded, and it was voted 7-0. Francis Goldsmith, secretary. The turnout for the meeting the next evening was almost total, and for the first time Larry Underwood, who had been in the zone only a week, got an idea of just how large the community was becoming. It was one thing to see people. Hi, welcome back. It was one thing to see people coming and going on the streets, usually alone or by twos, and quite another thing to see them all together in one place, Chautauqua Auditorium. The place was full, and every seat was taken, and more people sitting on the in the aisles and standing at the back of the hall. They were a curiously subdued crowd, murmuring but not babbling. For the first time since he had gotten to Boulder, it had rained all day long, a soft drizzle that seemed to hang suspended in the air, fogging you rather than wetting you. Even with the assemblage of close to 600, you could hear the quiet sound of the rain on the roof. The loudest sound inside was a constant rifle of paper as people looked at the mimeographed agendas that had been piled up on 2 card tables just inside the double doors. The agenda read, the Boulder Free Zone Open Meeting Agenda, August 18, 1990. 1. To see if the Free Zone will agree to read and ratify the Constitution of the United States of America. 2. To see if the Free Zone will agree to read and ratify the Bill of Rights to the Constitution of America. 3. To see if the Free Zone will nominate and elect the slate of 7 Free Zone representatives to serve as the governing board. 4. To see if the Free Zone will agree to veto power for Abigail Fremantle on any and all matters agreed to by the Free Zone representatives. 5. To see if the Free Zone will approve the burial committee of at least 20 persons initially to decently inter those who died of the superflu epidemic in Boulder. 6. To see if the Free Zone will approve a power committee of at least 60 persons initially to get the electricity back on before cold weather. 7. To see if the Free Zone will approve a search committee of at least 15 persons, its purpose to find the whereabouts of Abigail Fremantle if possible. Larry found that his nervous hands had been busy folding this agenda, which he knew nearly word for word, into a paper plane. Being on the ad hoc committee was sort of fun, like a game. Children playing at parliamentary process in someone's living room, sitting around and drinking Cokes. Cool? I did see that. It lights up.
Yeah.
Pretty key. It's pretty cool. I saw it when I came down. Sitting around and drinking Cokes, having a piece of cake Franny had made, talking things over. Even the part about sending spies over the mountains and right into the dark man's lap had seemed like a game, partly because it was a thing he couldn't imagine doing himself. You'd have to have lost most of your marbles to face such a living nightmare. But in their closed sessions, with the room confidently lit with Coleman gas lanterns, it had seemed okay. And if the judge or Dana Jurgens or Tom Collin got caught, it seemed, in those closed sessions at least, a thing no more important than losing a rook or a queen in a chess game. But now, sitting halfway down the hall with Lucy on one side and Leo on the other, he had not seen Nadine all day, and Leo didn't seem to know where she was either. Out had been his disinterested response. The truth of it came at home, and in his guts, it felt as if a battering ram was in use. It was no game. There were 580 people here, and most of them didn't have any idea that Larry Underwood wasn't no nice guy, or that the first person Larry Underwood had attempted to take care of after the epidemic had died of a drug overdose. His hands were damp and chilly. They were trying to fold the agenda into the paper plane again, and he stopped them. Lucy took one of them, squeezed it, and smiled at him. He was able to respond only with something that felt like a grimace, and in his heart he heard his mother's voice. There's something left out of you, Larry. Thinking of that made him feel panicky. Was there a way out of this, or had things already gone too far? He didn't want this milestone. He had already made a motion in closed session that could send Judge Ferris to his death. If he was voted out and someone else was voted in his seat, they'd have to take another vote on sending the judge, wouldn't they? Sure they would. And they'd vote to send someone else. When Lori Constable nominates me, I'll just stand up and say I decline. Sure, nobody can force me, can they? Not if I decide I want out. And who the fuck needs this kind of hassle? Wayne Stuckey, on that long ago beach, sang, "There's something in you that's like biting on tinfoil." Quietly, Lucy said, "You'll be fine." He jumped. "Huh?" I said, "You'll be fine. Won't he, Leo?" "Oh, yes," Leo said, bobbing his head. His eyes never left the audience, as if they had not yet been able to communicate its size in his brain. Fine. You don't understand, you numb broad, Larry thought. You're holding my hand and you don't understand that I could make a bad decision and wind up killing both of you. I'm well on my way to killing Judge Ferris, and he's seconding my fucking nomination. What a Polish fire drill this turned out to be. A little sound escaped his throat. Did you say something? Lucy asked. No. Then Stu was walking across the stage to the podium, his red sweater and blue jeans, very bright and clear in the harsh glow of the emergency lights, which were running from a Honda generator that Brad Kitchener and part of his crew from the power station had set up. The applause started somewhere in the middle of the hall. Larry was never sure where, and a cynical part of him was always convinced that he had been a plot arranged by Glenn Bateman, the resident expert in the art craft of crowd management. At any rate, it didn't really matter. The first solitary spats swelled in a thunder of applause. On the stage, Stu paused by the podium, looking comically amazed. The applause was joined by cheers and shrill whistles. Then the entire audience rose to its feet, the applause swelling to sound like heavy rain, and people were shouting, "Bravo, bravo!" Stu held up his hands, but they wouldn't stop. If anything, the sound redoubled in intensity. Stop that. Then the entire intensity. Larry glanced sideways at Lucy and saw that she was applauding strenuously. Her eyes fixed on Stu. Her mouth curved in a trembling but triumphant smile. She was crying. On his other side, Leo was also applauding, bringing his hands together again and again, with so much force that Larry thought they would fall off if Leo kept on so much longer. In the extremity of his joy, Leo's careful, one-back vocabulary had deserted him, the way English will sometimes desert a man or woman who had learned it as his or her second tongue. He could only hoot loudly and enthusiastically. Brad and Ralph had also run a PA from the generator, and now Stu blew into the mic and then spoke, "Ladies and gentlemen," but the applause rolled on. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll take your seats." But they were not ready to take their seats. The applause roared on and on. Larry looked down because his own hands hurt, and he saw that he was applauding as frantically as the rest. "Ladies and gentlemen." The applause thundered and echoed. Overhead, a family of barn swallows that had taken up residence in its fine and private place after the plague flew about crazily, swooping and diving, mad to get away to some place where people weren't. We're applauding ourselves, Larry thought. We're applauding the fact that we're here alive together. Maybe we're saying hello to the group self again. I don't know. Hello, Boulder. Finally, good to be here. Glad to be alive. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll take your seats, please, I sure would appreciate it. The applause began to taper off little by little. Now you could hear the ladies and some men too sniffing. Noses were honked, conversations were whispered, and there was that rustling auditorium sound of people taking their seats. I'm glad you're all here, Stu said. I'm glad to be here myself. There was a whine of feedback from the PA, and Stu muttered, "Goddamn thing," which was clearly picked up in broadcast. There was a ripple of laughter, and Stu colored. Guess we're all going to have to get used to this stuff again, he said. And that set off another burst of applause. When that had run itself out, Stu said, "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Stuart Renbin, originally from Arnett, Texas, although that seems far away, down the road from where I am now. Let me tell you." He cleared his throat, feedback whined briefly, and he took a weary step back from the mic. "I'm also pretty nervous up here, so bear with me." "We will, Stu," Harry Dunbarton yelled exuberantly, and there was appreciative laughter. It's like a camp meeting, Larry thought. Next thing, they'll sing hymns. If Mother Abigail was here, I bet we would be all ready. Last time I had so many people looking at me was when our consolidated high school made it to the football playoffs. And then they had 21 other guys to look at, too. Not to mention some girls in little tiny skirts. A hearty burst of laughter. Lucy pulled at Harry's neck and whispered in his ear. What was he worried about? He's a natural. Larry nodded. But if you'll bear with me, I'll get through it somehow, Stu said. More applause. The crowd would applaud Nixon's resignation speech and ask him to encore at the piano, Larry thought. Or on the piano. First off, I should explain about the ad hoc committee and how I happen to be up here at all, Stu said. There are 7 of us who got together and planned for this meeting so we could get organized somehow. There's a lot of things to do, and I'd like to introduce each member of the committee to you now. And I hope you save some applause for them, because they all pitched together to work out the agenda you've got in your hands right now. First, Miss Frances Goldsmith. Stand up, Franny, and let 'em see what you look like with a dress on. Fran stood up. She was wearing a pretty Kelly green dress and a modest string of pearls that might have cost $2,000 in the old days. She was roundly applauded, the applause accompanied by some good-natured wolf whistles. Fran sat down, blushing furiously. Before the applause could die away entirely, Stu went on. Mr. Glenn Bateman, from Woodsville, New Hampshire. Glenn stood, and they applauded him. He flipped a pair of twin V's from each of his closed fists, and the crowd roared its approval. Stu introduced Larry second to last, and he stood up, aware that Lucy was smiling up at him. And then that was lost in the warm cumber of applause that washed over him. Once, he thought, in another world, there would have been concerts, and this kind of applause would have been reserved for the show closer, a little nothing tune called Baby Can You Dig Your Man. This was better. He only stood for a second, but it seemed much longer. He knew he would not decline his nomination. Stu introduced Nick last and got the longest, loudest applause. And he got the longest, loudest applause. So, what you need? Are you afraid to say something? Ah, all right. There you go, miss. When it died away, Stu said, This wasn't on the agenda, but I wonder if we could start by singing the national anthem. I guess you folks remember the words in the tune. There was that ruffling, shuffling sound of people getting to their feet. Another pause as everyone waited for someone else to start. Then a girl's sweet voice rose in the air, solo for only the first 3 syllables. Oh, can you? And it was Franny's voice. For a moment it seemed Larry to be underlaid by another voice, his own, and the place was not Boulder, but upstate Vermont, and the day was July 4th. The Republic was 214 years old, and Rita lay dead in the tent behind him, her mouth filled with green puke and a bottle of pills in her stiffened hand. No, but I'll find out. Well, a chill of goose flesh passed over him, and suddenly he felt that they were being watched by something that could, in the words of the old song by The Who, see for miles and miles and miles. Something awful and dark and alien. For just a moment, he felt an urge to run from this place. Just run and never stop. This was no game they were playing here. This was serious business, killing business, maybe worse. The others, the other voices joined in, "Can you see by the dawn's early light?" And Lucy was singing, holding his hand, crying again, and others were crying. Most of them were crying for what was lost and bitter, the runaway American dream, chrome-wheeled, fuel-injected, and stepping out over the line. And suddenly his memory was not of Rita, dead in the tent, but of he and his mother at Yankee Stadium. It was September 29th, and the Yankees were only a game and a half behind the Red Sox, and all things were still possible. There were 55,000 people in the stadium, all standing. The players in the field, with their caps over their hearts. Guidry on the mound. Ricky Anderson was standing in the deep left field. Your dad. He wants to talk to whoever's in charge today. By the twilight's last gleaming, and the light standards were on the purple gloaming moths. Were in the purple gloaming moths, and the night flyers banging softly against them, and New York was around them, teeming, city of night and light. Larry joined the singing too, and when it was done, the applause rolled out once more. He was crying a bit himself. Rita was gone. Alice Underwood was gone. New York was gone. America was gone. Even if you could defeat Randall Flagg, whatever they might make would never be the same as that world of dark streets and bright dreams. Sweating freely under the bright emergency lights, Stu called the first item, reading and ratification of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The singing of the anthem had also affected him deeply, and he wasn't alone. Half the audience, more, was in tears. No one asked for an actual reading of either document, which would have been their right under the preliminary process, for which Stu was profoundly grateful. He wasn't much of a reader. The reading section of each item was approved by the Free Zone citizens. Glenn Bateman arose and moved that they accept both documents as governing Free Zone law. A voice in the back said, "Second that." Moved and seconded Stu. Those in favor say aye. Aye to the rooftops. Kojak, who had been sleeping by Glenn's chair, looked up, blinked, and then laid his muzzle on his paws again. A moment later he looked up again as the crowd gave themselves a thundering round of applause. They like voting, Stu thought. It makes them feel like they're finally in control of something again. God knows they need that feeling. We all need it. That preliminary taken care of, Stu felt tension worm into his muscles. Now, he thought, we'll see if there are any nasty surprises awaiting us. The third item on the agenda reads, he began, and then had to clear his throat again. Feedback whined at him, making him sweat even more. Bren was looking calmly at him, nodding for him to go on. It reads, to see if the Free Zone will nominate and elect the slate of 7 Free Zone representatives. That means, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman. Stu looked up from his jotted notes and felt a real jolt of fear, accompanied by something like a premonition. It was Harold Lauder. Harold was dressed in a suit and tie. His hair was neatly combed, and he was standing halfway up the middle aisle. Once Glenn had said he thought the opposition might coalesce around Harold, but so soon? He hoped not. For just a moment he thought wildly of not recognizing Harold, but both Nick and Glenn had warned him of the dangers inherent in making any part of this look like a railroad job. He wondered if it had been wrong about Harold turning over a new leaf. If he had been wrong, it looked as if he was going to find out right here. Chair recognizes Harold Lauder. Heads turned to crane. Craned to see Harold better. I'd like to move that we accept the slate of the ad hoc committee members in toto as the permanent committee, if they'll serve, that is. Harold sat down. There was a moment of silence. Stu thought crazily, Toto, wasn't that a dog in The Wizard of Oz? Then the applause swelled out again, filling the room, and dozens of cries of "I second" rang out. Harold was sitting placidly in his seat again, smiling and talking to the people who were thumping him on the back. Stu brought his gavel down half a dozen times for order. He planned this, Stu thought. These people are going to elect us, but it's Harold they'll remember. Still, he got to the root of the thing in the way none of us thought, not even Glenn. It was pretty damn near a stroke of genius. So why should he be so upset? Was he jealous, maybe? Were his good resolutions about Harold, maybe only the day before yesterday, already going by the boards? There was a motion on the floor. He blared into the mic, ignoring the feedback whine this time. Motion on the floor, folks. He pounded the gavel, and they quieted to a low babble. It's been moved and seconded, and we accept the ad hoc committee just as it stands as a permanent free zone committee. Before we go to discussion on the motion or to a vote, I ought to ask if anyone now serving on the committee has an objection or would like to step down. Silence from the floor. Very well, Stu said. Discussion of the motion? I don't think we need any, Stu, Dick Ellis said. It's a grand idea. Let's vote. What's wrong? Applause greeted this, and Stu needed no further urging. Charlie Impening was waving his hand to be recognized, but Stu ignored him. A good case of selective perception, Glenn Bateman would have said, and called the question. Those in favor of Harold Lauder's motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye, they bellowed, sending the barn swallows in another fury. Opposed? But no one was, not even Charlie Impening, at least vocally. There was not a nay in the chamber, so Stu pushed on to the next item of business, feeling slightly dazed, as if someone, namely Harold Lauder, had crept up behind him and clopped him one on the head with a large sledgehammer made out of silly putty. Let's get off and push them a while. Want to? Fran asked. She sounded tired. Sure. He got off his bike and walked alongside her. You okay, Fran? The baby bothering? No, I'm just tired. It's 1:15 in the morning, and hadn't you noticed? Yeah, it's late, Stu agreed. And they pushed the bikes side by side in companionable silence. The meeting had gone on until 1 hour ago, most of the discussion centering on the search party for Mother Abigail. The other items had all been passed with a minimum of discussion, although Judge Ferris had provided a fascinating piece of information that explained why there were so relatively few bodies in Boulder. According to the last 4 issues of The Camera, Boulder's daily newspaper, a wild rumor had swept the community, a rumor that the superflu had originated in Boulder Air Testing Facility in Broadway. Oh, in the testing facility. Spokesman for the center, a few still on their feet, protested that it was an utter nonsense, and anyone who doubted it was free to tour the facility, where they would find nothing more dangerous than the air pollution indicators and the wind vectoring devices. In spite of this, the rumor persisted, probably fed by the hysterical temper of those terrible days in late June. The air testing center had been either bombed or burned, much of Boulder's population had fled. But both the Burial Committee and the Power Committee had been passed, with an amendment from Harold Lauder, who had seemed almost awesomely prepared for the meeting, to the effect that each committee be increased by 2 for each increase of 100 in total of free zone population. The search committee was also voted with no opposition, but the discussion of Mother Abigail's disappearance had been a protracted one. Glenn had advised Stu before the meeting not to limit discussion on this topic unless absolutely necessary. It was worrying all of them, especially the idea that their spiritual leader believed she had committed some sort of sin. Best to let them get it off their chests. On the back of her note, the old woman had scrawled 2 biblical references, Proverbs 11:1-3 and Proverbs 21:28-31. Judge Ferris had searched out these out with the careful diligence of a lawyer preparing a brief, and at the beginning of the discussion he rose and read them in cracked and apocalyptic old man's voice. The verses in the 11th chapter of Proverbs stated, "A false balance is an abomination of the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. When pride cometh, then cometh shame. But with the lowly is wisdom. The integrity of the upright shall guide them, but the perverseness of transgressors shall destroy them." The quotation from the 21st chapter was in similar vein. A false witness shall perish, but the man that heareth speaketh constantly. A wicked man hardeneth his face, but as for the upright, he directeth his way. There is no wisdom, nor understanding, nor counsel against the Lord. A horse is prepared against the day of battle, but safety is of the Lord. The talk following the judge's oration, it could be called nothing else, of these 2 scriptural tidbits had ranged over far-reaching and often comical ground. One man stated ominously that if the chapter numbers were added, you came out to 31, the number of chapters in the book of Revelations. What? I thought there were only 22. Judge Ferris rose again to say that the book of Revelations only had 22 chapters, at least in his Bible, and that, in any case, 21 and 11 added up to 32, not 31. The aspiring numerologist muttered and said no more. That's what I thought. Another fellow stated that he had seen lights in the sky the night before Mother Abigail's disappearance, and that the prophet Isaiah had confirmed the existence of flying saucers. So they'd better put that in their collective pipe and smoke it, hadn't they? Judge Ferris rose once more, this time to point out that the previous gentleman had mistaken Isaiah for Ezekiel, that the exact reference was not to flying saucers, but to a wheel within a wheel, and that the judge himself was of the opinion that the only flying saucers yet proven were those that sometimes flew during marital spats. That's funny. Much of the other discussion was a rehash of the dreams, which had ceased altogether. As far as anyone knew, and now seemed rather dreamlike themselves, person after person rose to protest the charge that Mother Abigail had laid upon herself, that of pride. They spoke of her courtesy and her ability to put a person at ease with just a word or a sentence. Ralph Brentner, who looked awed by the size of the crowd and was nearly tongue-tied, but determined to speak his piece, rose and spoke in that vein for nearly 5 minutes, adding at the end that he had not known a finer woman since his mother had died. When he sat down, he seemed very near tears. When taken together, the discussion reminded Stu uncomfortably of a wake. It told him that in their hearts they had already come halfway to giving her up. If she did not return now, Abigail Fremantle would find herself welcomed, still sought after, still listened to. Where's 54? 5. Okay. Yeah, we have plenty of time to finish this. I just want to double check it. But she would also find, Stu thought, that her position was subtly changed. If a showdown between her and the Free Zone Committee came, it was no longer a foregone conclusion that she would win, veto power or not. She had gone away, and the community had continued to exist. The community would not forget that, as they had already half forgotten the power the dreams had once briefly held over their lives. After the meeting, more than 2 dozen people had sat for a while on the lawn behind Chautauqua Hall. The rain had stopped, the clouds were tattering, and the evening was pleasantly cool. Stu and Franny had sat with Larry, Lucy, Leo, and Harold. "You darn near knocked us out of the ballpark this evening," Larry told Harold. He nudged Franny with an elbow. "I told you he was ace high, didn't I?" Harold had merely smiled and shrugged modestly. "A couple of ideas, that's all. You seven have started things moving again. You should at least have the privilege of seeing it through to the end of the beginning." Now, 15 minutes after the two of them had left the impromptu gathering, and still 10 minutes from home, Stu repeated, "You sure you're feeling fine?" "Yes, my legs are a little tired, that's all." "You want to take it easy, Francis?" "Don't call me that. You know I hate it." "I'm sorry. I won't do it again, Francis." "All men are bastards. I'm going to try and improve my act, Francis. Honest, I am." She showed him her tongue, then which came to an interesting point, but he could tell her heart wasn't in the banter, and he dropped it. She looked pale and rather listless, a startling contrast to the Franny who had sung the national anthem with such a heart a few hours earlier. "Something giving you the blues, honey?" She shook her head no, but he thought he saw tears in her eyes. "What is it? Tell me." "It's nothing. That's what's the matter. Nothing is what's bothering me. It's over. I finally realized it. That's all. Less than 600 people singing the Star Spangled Banner. It just kind of hit me all at once. No hot dog stands. The Ferris wheel isn't going around and around at Coney Island tonight. No one having a nightcap at the Space Needle in Seattle. Someone finally found a way to clean up the dope in Boston's combat zone, and a chicken ranch business in Times Square. Those were terrible things, but I think the cure was a lot worse than the disease. Know what I mean?" "Yes, I do. In my diary, I had a little section called Things to Remember, so the baby would know. Oh, all the things he never will. And it gives me the blues, thinking of that. I should have called it Things That Are Gone." She did sob a little, stopping her bike so she could put the back of her hand on her mouth and try to keep it in. "It got everybody the same way," Stu said, putting an arm around her. "A lot of people are going to cry themselves to sleep tonight. You better believe it." "I don't see how you can grieve for a whole country," she said, crying harder. "But I guess you can. These little things keep shooting through my mind. Car salesman, Frank Sinatra, old Orchard Beach in July, all crowded with people, most of them from Quebec. That stupid guy on MTV, Randy, I think was his name. The Times. Oh God, I sound like a freaking Rod McQuan poem." He held her, patting her back, remembering one time when his Aunt Betty had gotten a crying fit over some bread that didn't rise. She was big with his little cousin Lottie then, 7 months or so, and Stu could remember her wiping her eyes, the corner of her dish towel, and telling him to never mind. Any pregnant woman was just 2 doors down from the mental ward because the juices their glands put out were always scrambling up into a stew. After a while, Franny said, Okay, better. Let's go." "Franny, I love you," he said. They resumed to pushing their bikes. She asked him, "What do you remember best? What's the one thing?" "Well, he said, and then stopped with a little laugh. "No, I don't know, Stuart. It's crazy. Tell me." "I don't know if you want to." You'll start looking for the guys with the butterfly nets. Tell me, she said. She had seen Stuart in many moods, but this curious, embarrassed uneasiness was new to her. I never told anybody, he said, but I have been thinking on it the last couple of weeks. Something happened to me back in '82. I was pumping gas at Bill Hopkins' gas station then. He used to hire me on, if he could, when I was laid off at the calculator plant in town. He had me on part-time, 11 p.m. to closing, which was 3 in the morning. That looked back in those days. There wasn't much business after the people getting off the 3 to 11 shift at the Dixie paper factory stopped to get their gas. Lots of nights there wasn't a single car stopped between 12 and 3. I'd sit there and read a book or a magazine. And lots of nights I'd doze off, you know. Yes, she did know. In her mind's eye, she could see him, the man who would become her man in the fullness of time and the peculiarity of events. A broad-shouldered man sleeping in a plastic wool coat chair with a book open and face down on his lap. She saw him sleeping in an island of white light, an island surrounded by great inland sea of Texas night. She loved him in this picture, and she loved him in all the pictures her mind drew. Well, this one night, it was about 2:15, and I was sitting behind Hap's desk with my feet up, reading some Western, Louis L'Amour, Elmer Leonard, someone like that. And in pulls this big old Pontiac with all the windows rolled down and the tape player going like mad, playing Hank Williams. I even remember the song. It was moving on. This guy, not young, not old, and is all by himself. He's a good-looking man, but in a way, that was a little scary. I mean, he looked like he might be do scary things without thinking very hard about them. He was bushy, curly, dark hair. There was a bottle of wine snugged down between his legs, and a pair of styrofoam dice hanging from the rearview mirror. He says, "High test," and I said, "Okay." For a moment, I just stood there and looked at him, because he looked familiar. I was playing Place the Face. They were on the corner now. Their apartment building was across the street. They paused there. Franny was looking at him closely. So I said, "Do I know you? Ain't you from up around Corbett or Maxon?" But it didn't really seem like I knew him from those two towns. And he says, "No, but I passed through Corbett once with my family when I was just a kid. Seemed like I passed through just about every place in America when I was a kid. My dad was in the Air Force." So I went back and filled up his car, and all the time I'm thinking about him, playing Place the Face. And all at once it came to me. All at once I knew. And I damn near pissed myself, because the man behind the wheel of the Pontiac was supposed to be dead. Who was he, Stuart? Who was he? No, you let me tell it my way, Franny. Not that it ain't a crazy story no matter what way I tell it. I went back to the window and I says, that'll be $6.30. He gave me 2 $5 bills and told me to keep the change, and I says, "I think I might have placed you now." And he says, "Well, maybe you do." And he gives me this weird, chilly smile, and all the time Hank Williams is singing about going to town. I says, "If you are who I think you are, you're supposed to be dead." And he says, "You don't want to believe everything you read, man." I says, "You like Hank Williams all right?" It was all I could think of to say, because I saw Franny. If I didn't say something, he was going to roll up that power window and go tooling on down the road. And I wanted him to go, but I also didn't want him to go. Not yet. Not until I was sure. I didn't know then that a person is never sure about a lot of things, no matter how much he wants to be. He says Hank Williams is one of the best. I like roadhouse music. And then he says, "I'm going to New Orleans. Gonna drive all night. Sleep all day tomorrow. Then barrel house all night long." Is that the same? New Orleans? I say, "As what?" he says. And he says, "Well, And I say, well, it's all the South, although there are considerably more trees down that way. And that makes him laugh. He says, maybe I'll see you again. But I didn't want to see him again, Franny, because he had the eyes of a man who had been trying to look into the dark for a long time. And he has maybe begun to see what is there. I think if I ever saw that man Flagg, his eyes might look a little like that. Stu shook his head as they pushed their bikes across the road and parked them. I've been thinking of that. I thought about getting some of his records after that, but I didn't want them. His voice, it's a good voice, but it gives me the creeps. Stuart, who are you talking about? You remember a rock and roll group called The Doors? The man that stopped that night for gas in Arnett was Jim Morrison. I'm sure of it. Her mouth dropped open. But he died. He died in France. And then she stopped, because there had been something funny about Morrison's death, hadn't there? Something secret. Did he, Stu? Did he? Stuart asked. I wonder. Maybe he did, and the fellow I saw was just a guy who looked like him, but do you really think it was? She asked. They were sitting on the steps of their building now, shoulders touching, like small children, waiting for their mother to call them in to supper. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I do. And until this summer, I thought that would always be the strangest thing that ever happened to me. Boy, was I wrong. And you never told anyone, she marveled. You saw Jim Morrison years after he supposedly died, and you never told anyone? Stuart Redmond, God should have given you a combination lock instead of a mouth when he sent you out into the world. Stu smiled. Well, the years rolled by, and as they say in the books, and whenever I thought of that night, as I did from time to time, I got surer and surer it wasn't him after all. Just someone who looked a bit like him, I had my mind pretty well at rest on the subject, but in the last few weeks, I found myself puzzling over it again, and I think more and more that it was. Hell, he might even still be alive now. That'd be a real laugh, wouldn't it? If he is, he's not here, she said. No, Stu agreed. I wouldn't expect him to be here. I saw his eyes, you see. She put her hand on his arm. That's some story. Yeah, and there's probably 20 million people in this country with one just like it. Only about Elvis Presley or Howard Hughes. Not anymore. No, not anymore. Harold was something tonight, wasn't he? I believe that's called changing the subject. I believe you're right. Yes, she said he was. She smiled at her worry. He smiled at her worried tone and the slight frown which had puckered her brow. Bothered you a little, didn't it? Yes, but I wouldn't say so. You're in Harold's corner now. Now, that's not fair, Fran. It bothered me too. There we had those two advance meetings, hashed everything over to a fare thee well, at least we thought so, and along comes Harold. He takes a whack whack here and a whack whack there and says, ain't that what you really meant? And we say, yeah, thanks, Harold, it was. Stu shook his head, putting everybody up for blanket election. How come we never thought of that, Fran? That was sharp, and we never even discussed it. Well, none of us knew for sure what kind of mood they'd be in. I thought, especially after Mother Abigail walked off, that they'd be glum, maybe even mean, with that imponing talking to them like some kind of death crow. I wonder if he should be shut up somehow, Stu said thoughtfully. But it wasn't like that. They were so exuberant just to be together. Did you feel that? Yes, I did. It was like a tent revival almost. I don't think it was anything Harold had planned. He just seized the moment. I just don't know how to feel about him, Stu said. That night after we hunted for Mother Abigail, I felt real bad for him. When Ralph and Glenn turned up, he looked downright horrible, like he was going to faint or something. But when we were talking out on the lawn just now and everybody was congratulating him, he seemed puffed up like a toad. Like he was smiling on the outside, and on the inside he was saying, there, you see, what your committee's worth, you stupid bunch of fools. He's like one of those puzzles you could never figure out when you were a kid. The Chinese finger pullers or those three steel rings that would come apart if you pulled them just the right way. Fran stuck out her feet and looked at them. Speaking of Harold, did you see anything funny about my feet, Stuart? Do you see anything funny? Stu looked at them judiciously. Nope. Just that you're wearing those funny-looking earth shoes from up the street. And they're all mighty big, of course. She slapped at him. Earth shoes are very good for your feet. All the best magazines say so. And I happen to be a size 7. For your information, that's practically petite. So, what have your feet got to do with anything? It's late, honey. He began to push his bike again, and she fell in beside him. Nothing, I guess. It's just that Harold kept looking at my feet. After the meeting when we were sitting out on the grass and talking things over. She shook her head, frowning a little. Now, why would Harold Lauder be interested in my feet? She asked. When Larry and Lucy got home, they were by themselves, walking hand in hand. Some time before, Leo had gone into the house where he stayed with Nadine Mom. Now, as they walked toward the door, Lucy said, It was quite a meeting. I never thought. Words caught in her throat as the dark form unfolded itself from the shadows of their porch. Larry felt hot fear leap up in his throat. It's him, he thought wildly. He's come to get me. I'm going to see his face. But then he wondered how he could have thought that, because it was Nadine Cross, that was all. She was wearing a dress of some soft bluish-gray material, and her hair was loose, falling over her shoulders and down her back, dark hair shot with skeins of purest white. She sort of makes Lucy look like a used car on the scalper's lot, he thought, before he could help himself, and then hated himself for thinking it. That was the old Larry talking. Old Larry? You might as well say old Adam. Nadine, Lucy was saying shakily, with one hand pressed to her chest. You gave me a fright of my life, I thought. Well, I don't know what I thought. She took no notice of Lucy. Can I talk to you? She asked Larry. What, now? He looked sideways at Lucy, or thought he did. Later, he was never able to remember what Lucy had looked like in that moment, as if she had been eclipsed, but by a dark star rather than a bright one. Now? It has to be now. In the morning it has to be now, Larry, or never. He looked at Lucy again, and this time he could see her. Saw the resignation in her face as she looked from Larry to Nadine and back again. He saw the hurt. I'll be right in, Lucy. No, you won't, she said dully. Tears had begun to sparkle in her eyes. Oh, no, I doubt it. 10 minutes. 10 minutes, 10 years, Lucy said. She's come to get you. Did you bring your dog collar and your muzzle, Nadine? For Nadine, Lucy Swan did not exist. Her eyes were fixed only on Larry, those dark, wide eyes. For Larry, they would always be the strangest, most beautiful eyes he had ever seen. The eyes that came back to you, calm and deep, when you're hurt or in bad trouble, or maybe just about out of your mind with grief. I'll be in, Lucy, he said automatically. Go on. Yes, I guess I will. She's come. I'm dismissed. She ran up the stairs, stumbling on the top one, regaining her balance, pulling the door open, closing it behind her with a slam, cutting off the sound of her sobs, even as they started. Nadine and Larry looked at each other for a long time, as if entranced. This is how it happens, he thought, when you catch someone's eye across the room and never forget them, or see someone at the far end of a crowded subway platform that could have been your double, or hear a laugh on the street that could have been the laugh of the first girl you ever made love to. But something in his mouth tasted so bitter. Let's walk down to the corner and back, Nadine said in a low voice. Would you do that much? I better go into her. You picked one hell of a bad time to come. Please, just down the corner and back. If you want, I'll go down on my knees and beg. If that's what you want. Here, see? To his horror, she did get down on her knees, pulling her skirt up a little so he could so she could do it, showing him her bare legs, making him curiously certain that everything else was bare as well. Why should he think that? He didn't know. Her eyes were on him, making his head spin, and there was a sickening feeling of power involved here someplace. Involved with having her on her knees before him, her mouth on a level with. Get up, he said roughly. He took her hands and yanked her to her feet, trying not to see the way the skirt rode up even more before falling back into place. Her thighs were the color of cream, that shade of white that is not pale and dead, but vigorous and healthy and enticing. Come on, he said, almost totally unnerved. They walked west in the direction of the mountains, which were a negative presence far ahead. Triangle patches of darkness blotted out the stars that had come out after the rain. Walking toward those mountains at night always made him feel queasy, uneasy, and somehow adventurous. And now, with Nadine by his side, her hand resting lightly on the crook of his elbow, those feelings seemed heightened. He had always had vivid dreams, 3 or 4 nights ago, about those mountains. He had dreamed there were trolls in them, hideous creatures with bright green eyes, and the oversized heads of hydrocephalic cretins, and short-fingered, powerful hands, strangler's hands, idiot trolls, guarding the passes through the mountains, waiting until his time came around, the time of the dark man. A soft breeze meandered down the street, blowing papers before it. They passed King's Supers, a few shopping carts standing in the big parking lot like dead sentinels, making him think of the Lincoln Tunnel. There had been trolls in the Lincoln Tunnel. They had been dead. But that didn't mean all the trolls in their new world were dead. It's hard, Nadine said, her voice still low. She made it hard because she's right. I want you now, but I'm afraid it's too late. I want to stay here. Nadine. No, she said fiercely. Let me finish. I want to stay here. Can't you understand that? But if we're with each other, I'll be able to. You're my last chance, she said, her voice breaking. Joe's gone now. No, he hasn't, Larry said, feeling slow and stupid and bewildered. We dropped him off at your place on the way home. Isn't he there? No, there's a boy named Leo Rockway asleep in his bed. What are you? Listen, she said. Listen to me. Can't you listen? As long as I had Joe, I was all right. I could be as strong as I had to be. But he doesn't need me anymore, and I need to be needed. He does need you. Of course he does, Nadine said, and Larry felt afraid again. She wasn't talking about Leo anymore. He didn't know who she was talking about. He needs me. That's what I'm afraid of. That's why I came to you. She stepped in front of him and looked up, her chin tilted. He could smell her secret, clean scent, and he wanted her. A part of him turned back toward Lucy. That was the part of him he needed if he was going to make it here in Boulder. If he let it go and went with Nadine, they might as well slink out of Boulder tonight. It would be finished with him. The old Larry triumphant. I have to go home, he said. I'm sorry. You'll have to work it out on your own, Nadine. Work it out on your own? Weren't those the words he had been using to people in one form or another all his life? Why did they have to rise up this way, when he knew he was right, and still catch him, and twist in him, and make him doubt himself? Make love to me, she said, and put her arms around his neck. She pressed her body against his, and he knew, by its looseness, its warmth, and springiness, that he had been right. She was wearing the dress, and that was all, buck naked underneath. He thought, and thinking it excited him blackly. That's all right. I can feel you, she said, and began to wiggle against him, sideways, up and down, creating a delicious friction. Make love to me, and that will be the end of it. I'll be safe. Safe. I'll be safe. He reached up, and later, he never knew how he was able to do that when he could have been inside her warmth in only 3 quick movements. in one thrust, the way she wanted it, but somehow he reached up and unlocked her hands, pushed her away with some force that she stumbled and almost fell. A low moan came from her. Larry, if you knew... Well, I don't. Why don't you try telling me instead of rape, she repeated, laughing shrilly. Oh, that's funny. Oh, what you said, me. Rape you. Oh, Larry. Whatever you want from me, you could have had. You could have had it last week, or the week before. The week before that, I asked you to take it. I wanted you to have it. That was too soon, she whispered. And now it's too late, he said, hating the brutal sound of his voice, but unable to control it. He was still shaking all over from wanting her. How was he supposed to sound? What are you going to do, huh? All right. Goodbye, Larry. She was turning away. In that instant, she knew forever. She was the oral hygienist. She was Yvonne, with whom he had shared an apartment in L.A. She had pissed him off, and so he had just slipped into his boogie shoes, leaving her holding the lease. She was Rita Blakemore. Worst of all, she was his mother, Nadine. She didn't turn around. She was a black shape distinguishable from other black shapes only when she crossed the street, and then she disappeared altogether against the black background of the mountains. He called her name once again, and she didn't answer. There was something terrifying in the way she had left him, the way she had just melted into that black backdrop. He stood in front of King's Supers, hands clenched, brow covered with pearls of sweat in spite of everything of the evening cool. His ghosts were with him now, and at last he knew how you pay off not being no nice guy. Never clear about your own motivations, never able to weigh hurt against help, except by rule of thumb. Never able to get rid of the sour taste of doubt in your mouth, and his head jerked up, his eyes widened until they seemed to bulge from his face. The wind had picked up again. It made a strange hooting sound in some empty doorway, and farther away he thought he could hear boot heels pacing off the night. Run-down boot heels, somewhere in the foothills, coming to him on the chilly draught of this early morning breeze. Dirty boot heels, clocking their way into the grave of the West. Lucy heard him let himself in, and her heart leaped up fiercely. She told it to stop, that he was probably only coming back for his things. But it would not stop. He picked me, was the thought that hammered into her brain, driven there by her heart's triumphant beat. He picked me. In spite of her excitement and hope, which she was helpless to control, she lay stiffly on her back on the bed, waiting and watching nothing but the ceiling. She had only told him the truth when she had said that. For her and for girls like her friend Jolene, the only fault was too much need to love. But she had always been faithful. She was no cheater. She hadn't cheated on her husband, and she never cheated on Larry. And if in the years before she had met them, she hadn't exactly been a nun. Time passed, as time passed. She just couldn't get a hold of the things she had done. You couldn't get a hold of the things you had done and turn them right again. Such power might be given to the gods, but it was not given to men and women, and that was probably a good thing. Had it been otherwise, people would probably die of old age still trying to rewrite their teens. If you knew the past was out of reach, maybe you could forgive. Tears were stealing down her cheeks. The door clicked open, and she saw him in it. Just a silhouette. Lucy, you awake? Yes. Can I put on the lamp? If you want. She heard a minute hiss of gas, and then the light came on, turned down to a thread of flame, revealing him. He looked pale and shaken. I have something to say. No, you don't. Just come to bed. I have to say it. He pressed his hand against his forehead and ran it through his hair. Larry, she sat up. Are you all right? He spoke as if he hadn't heard her, and he spoke without looking at her. I love you. If you want me, you've got me. But I don't know if you're getting much. I'm never going to be your best bet, Lucy. I'll take the chance. Come to bed. He did, and they did. And when the love was over, she told him she loved him. It was true. God knew that. And it seemed to be what he needed to hear. Val, find out if Chris is coming today. God knew that, and it seemed to be what he needed to hear, needed to hear. But she didn't think he slept for a long time. Once in the night she came awake, or dreamed she did, and it seemed to her that Larry was at the window, looking out, his head cocked in a listening posture, the lines of light and shadow giving his face the appearance of a haggard mask. But in the light of day, she was more sure that it must have been a dream. In the light of day, he seemed to be his old self again. It was only 3 days later that they heard from Ralph Brentner that Nadine had moved in with Harold Lauder. At that, Larry's face seemed to tighten. But it was only for a moment, and although Lucy disliked herself for it, Ralph's news made her breathe a little easier. It seemed it must be over. She went home only briefly after seeing Larry. She let herself in, went to the living room, and lit the lamp. Carrying it high, she went to the back of the house, pausing for just a moment to let the light spill into the boy's room. She wanted to see if she had told Larry the truth. She had. Leo lay asprawl in the tangle of bedclothes, dressed only in his undershorts. But the cuts and scrapes had faded, disappeared altogether in most cases, and the all-over tan he had gotten from going practically naked had also faded. But it was more than that, she thought. Something in his face had changed. She could see the change, even though he was asleep. That expression of mute, needful savagery had gone out of it. He was Joe no more. This was just a boy sleeping after a busy day. She thought of the night she had been almost asleep, and she had come awake to find him gone from beside her. They had been in New Berwick, Maine, most of the continent away now. She had followed him to the house where Larry lay sleeping on the porch. Okay, are we talking about Lucy or Nadine? I guess we're talking about Nadine. Larry sleeping inside, Joe standing outside, brandishing his knife. Yep, this is Nadine's thoughts. With mute savagery, and nothing between them but the thin and sliceable screen. And she had made him come away. Hate pounced on Nadine in a surging flash, striking up brilliant sparks as if from flint and steel. The Coleman lamp stumbled. Where did I go? The Coleman lamp trembled in her hand, making wild shadows leap and dance. She should have let him do it. She should have held the door for Joe herself, let him in so he could stab and rip and cut and puncture and gut and destroy. She should have. But now the boy turned over and moaned in his throat, as if waking. His hands came up and batted the air, as if warding off a black shape in a dream. And Nadine withdrew, a pulse beating thickly in her temples. There was still something strange in the boy. She didn't like the way he had moved just now, as if he had picked up her thoughts. She had to go ahead now. She had to be quick. She went into her own room. There was a rug on the floor. There was a single narrow bed, an old maid's bed. That was all. There was not even a picture. The room was totally devoid of character. She opened the closet door, rummaged around her hanging clothes. She was on her knees now, sweating. She drew out a brightly colored box with a photograph of laughing adults in the front, adults who were playing a party game that was at least 3,000 years old. She had found the planchette in the downtown novelty shop. She dared not use it in the house, not with the boy here. In fact, she had not dared to use it at all, until now. Something had impelled her into the shop, and when she had seen the planchette in its gray party box, a terrible struggle had gone on inside her. The sort of struggle psychologists call aversion compulsion. She had been sweating, then, as now, wanting two things at the same time: to hurry out of that shop without looking back, and to snatch the box, that dreadful gay box, and carry it home with her. Later, the latter wish frightened her the more, because it did not seem to be her own wish. At last she had taken the box. That had been 4 days ago. Each night the compulsion had grown stronger until tonight, half insane with fears she didn't understand. She had gone to Larry, wearing the blue-gray dress with nothing on underneath. Oh, I gotta be able to see. And the sleep is not letting me. Here we go. She had gone to put an end to the fears for good, waiting on the porch for them to get back from the meeting. She had been sure she had finally done the right thing. There had been that feeling in her, that lightly drunk, starstruck feeling, that she'd not properly had since she ran across the dew-drenched grass with the boy behind her. Only this time the boy would catch her. Why do I have to be able to? I hadn't cleared my eyes asleep, sorry. She would let him catch her. It would be the end. But when he caught her, he hadn't wanted her. Nadine stood up, holding the box to her chest, and put out the lamp. He had scorned her, and didn't they say the hell hath no fury? A scorned woman might well traffic with the devil, or his henchman. She paused only long enough to get the large flashlight from the table in the front hall. From deeper inside the house, the boy cried out in his sleep, freezing her for a moment, making the hair prickle on her scalp. Then she let herself out. Her Vespa was at the curb, the Vespa she had used some days ago to motor up to Harold Lauder's house. Why had she gone there? She hadn't passed a dozen words with Harold since she'd gotten to Boulder, but in her confusion about the planchette, and in her terror of the dreams that continued to come to her even after everyone else had stopped, it had seemed to her that she must talk about it to Harold. She had been afraid of that impulse, too. She remembered that she put the Vespa's ignition key into its slot, like the sudden urge to pick up the planchette. Amaze your friends, brighten up your get-togethers, the box said. It had seemed to be the idea that had come to her from outside of herself. His thought, maybe. But when she'd given in, gone to Harold's, he hadn't been home. The house was locked, the only locked house she had come upon in Boulder, and the shades were drawn. She'd rather liked that, but she'd had a moment's bitter disappointment that Harold was not there. If he had been, he could have let her in and then locked the door behind her. They could have gone into the living room and talked, or made love, or had done unspeakable things together, and no one would have known. Harold's was a private place. What's happening to me? She whispered in the dark. But the dark had no answer for her. She started the Vespa, and the steady burping pop of the engine seemed to profane the night. She put it in gear and drove away to the west. Moving the cool night air on her face, she felt better at last. Blow away the cobwebs, night wind. You know, don't you? When all the choices had been taken away, what do? You choose what's left. You choose whatever dark adventure was meant for you. You let Larry have his stupid little twist of tale with her tight pants and her single-syllable vocabulary and her movie magazine mind. You go beyond them. You risk whatever there is to be risked. Mostly you risk yourself. The road unrolled before her in the baby spotlight of the Vespa's headlamp. She had to switch to second gear as the road began to climb. She was on the baseline road now, headed up the Black Mountain. Let them have their meetings. They were concerned with getting the power back on. Her lover was concerned with the world. The Vespa's engine lugged and strained and somehow carried on. A horrible yet sexy kind of fear began to grip her, and the vibrating saddle of the motorbike began to heat her up down there. Why, you're horny, Nadine, she thought with shrill good humor. Naughty, naughty, naughty. To her right was the straight drop-off. Nothing but death down there. And up above, well, she would see. It was too late to turn back, and that thought alone made her feel paradoxically and deliciously free. An hour later, she was in the Sunrise Amphitheater. But sunrise was still three or more hours away. The amphitheater was close to the summit of Flagstaff Mountain, and nearly everyone in the free zone had made the trip to the camping area at the top before they had been in Boulder very long. On a clear day, which was most days in Boulder, at least during the summer season, you could see Boulder and I-25 stretching away south to Denver, and then off into the haze toward New Mexico 200 miles down. Due east were the flatlands, stretching away toward Nebraska, and closer at hand was Boulder Canyon, a knife gash through foothills that were walled in pine and spruce. In summers gone by, gliders had plied the thermals over Sunrise Amphitheater like birds. Now Nadine saw only what was revealed in the glow of the 6-cell flashlight, which she had put on a picnic table near the drop-off. There was a large artist's sketch pad turned back to a clean sheet, and squatting on that, the 3-cornered planchette, like a triangle spider. Protruding from its belly like a spider's stinger was a pencil, lightly touching the pad. Nadine was in a feverish state. It was half euphoria and half terror. Coming up here on the back of her gamey, laboring Vespa, which had most decidedly not been made for mountain climbing, she had felt what Harold had felt in Nederland. She could feel him. But while Harold had felt this in a rather precise and technological way, as a piece of steel attracted to a magnet, a drawing toward, Nadine felt it as a kind of mystic event, a border crossing. It was as if these mountains, of which she was now only in the foothills, were in no man's land between two spheres of influence, Flagg in the west and the old woman in the east. And here the magic flew both ways, making its own concoction that belonged neither to God nor to Satan, but which was totally pagan. She felt she was in a haunted place. In the planchette, she had tossed the brightly marked box, stamped "Made in Taiwan," away indifferently for the wind to take. The planchette itself was only a poorly stamped piece of fiberboard or gypsum, but it didn't matter. It was a tool she would only use once, only dared to use once, and even a poorly made tool can serve its purpose: to break open a door, to close a window, to write a name. The words in the box recurred. Amaze your friends, brighten up your get-togethers. What was the song Larry sometimes bellowed from the seat of his Honda as they rode along? Hello, Central. What's the matter with your line? I want to talk to. Talk to who? That was the question, wasn't it? She remembered the time she had used the planchette in college. That had been more than a dozen years ago, but it might as well have been yesterday. She had gone upstairs to ask someone on the 3rd floor of the dorm, a girl named Rachel Timms, about the assignment in the remedial reading class they shared. The room had been filled with girls, 6 or 8 of them at least, giggling and laughing. Nadine remembered thinking that they acted as if they were high on something, smoke or maybe even blow. Stop it, Rachel said, giggling herself. How do you expect the spirits to communicate if you're acting like a bunch of donkeys? The idea of laughing donkeys struck them as deliciously funny, and a fresh feminine gale blew through the room for a while. The planchette had set Then, as it sat now, a triangular spider on 3 stubby legs, pencil pointing down, while they giggled. Nadine picked up a sheaf of oversized pages torn from the artist's sketchbook and shuffled through those messages from the astral plane, which had already come in. Tommy says, "You have been using that strawberry douche again. Mother says she's fine. Chunga chunga. Johnny says you won't fart so much if you stop eating those cafeteria beans." Others just as silly. Now the giggles had quieted enough so they could start again. 3 girls sat on the bed, each with her fingertips placed on the different sides of the planchette. For the moment there was nothing. Then the board quivered. "You did it, Sandy," Rachel accused. "I did not." "Shh." The board quivered again, and the girls hushed. It moved, stopped, moved again. It moved to the letter F. "Fuh," the girl named Sandy said. "Fuck you too," someone else said. And they were off and giggling again. "Shh," Rachel said sternly. Planchette began to move more rapidly, tracing out the letters A, T, H, E, and R. "Father dear, your baby's here," a girl named Patty something or other said and giggled. "It must be my father. He died of a heart attack when I was 3. "It's writing some more," Sandy said. SAYS, the planchette spelled laboriously. "What's going on?" Nadine whispered, and a tall, horse-faced girl whispered 2A. Tall, horse-faced girl she didn't know. The horse-faced girl was looking on with her hands in her pockets and a disgusted look on her face. "A bunch of girls playing games with something they don't understand," the horse-faced girl said. "That's what's going on." She spoke in an even lower whisper. "Father says, Patty," Sandy quoted. "It's your dear old dad, all right, Pats." Another burst of giggles. The horse-faced girl was wearing spectacles. Now she took her hands out of her pockets of the overalls she was wearing and used them to remove the spectacles from her face. She polished them and explained further to Nadine, still in a whisper. "The planchette is a tool used by psychics and mediums. Kinesiologists." "What ologists?" "Scientists who study movement and the interaction of muscles and nerves." "Oh." "They claim that the planchette is actually responding to a tiny muscle movements, probably guided by the subconscious rather than the conscious mind. Of course, mediums and psychics claim that the planchette is moved by entities from the spirit world." Another burst of hysterical laughter came from the girls clustered around the board. Nadine looked over the horse-faced girl's shoulder and saw the message read now. "Father says Patty should stop going to the bathroom so much," another girl in the circle of spectators suggested, and everyone laughed some more. "Either way, they're just fooling with it," the horse-faced girl said with a disdainful sniff. "It's very unwise. Both mediums and scientists agree that automatic writing can be dangerous." "The spirits are unfriendly tonight, you think?" Nadine asked lately. "Perhaps the spirits are always unfriendly," the horse-faced girl said, giving her a sharp look. "Or you might get a message from your subconscious mind which you were totally unprepared to receive. There are documented cases of automatic writing getting entirely out of control, you know. People have gone mad." "Oh, that seems awfully far-fetched. It's just a game." "Games have a way of turning serious sometimes." A loud burst of laughter yet tacked a period to the horse-faced girl's comment before Nadine could reply. The girl named Patty something or other had fallen off the bed and lay on the floor, holding her stomach with laughter and kicking her feet weakly. The completed message read, "Father says Patty should stop going to the submarine races with Leonard Katz." "You did that?" Patty said to Sandy as she finally sat up again. "I didn't, Patty, honest." "It was your father. From the great beyond, from out there," another girl told Patty in a Boris Karloff voice, which Nadine thought was actually quite good. "Just remember that he's watching you the next time you take off your pants in the car seat of Leonard's Dodge." Another loud outburst greeted this sally. As it tapered off, Nadine pushed forward and twitched at Rachel's arm. She meant to ask for the assignment and then made a quiet escape. Nadine, Rachel cried. Her eyes were sparkling and gay. Her cheeks had bloomed with roses. Sit down. Let's see if the spirits have a message for you. No, really, I only came to get the assignment in remedial Oh, poop on the assignment in remedial reading. This is important, Nadine. This is big time. You've got to have a try. Here, sit down next to me. Janie, you take the other side. Janie sat down opposite Nadine, and at the repeated urging of Rachel Timms, Nadine found herself with the 8 fingers of her hands touching the planchette lightly. For some reason, she looked over her shoulder at the horse-faced girl. She shook her head at Nadine once, deliberately, and the overhead fluorescent bounced off the lens of her spectacles and turned her eyes into a pair of large white flashes of light. She remembered as she stood looking down at another planchette in the glow of the 6-cell flashlight. But her remark to the horse-faced girl had recurred. It was just a game, for heaven's sake. And what horrible thing could possibly happen in the middle of a gaggle of giggling girls? If there was more hostile atmosphere for the production of genuine spirits, hostile or otherwise, Nadine didn't know what it could be. Now, everybody be quiet, Rachel commanded. Spirits, do you have a message for our sister and Brownie in good standing, Nadine Cross? The planchette didn't move. Nadine felt mildly embarrassed. Eeny, meeny, chilly beanie, the girl who had done Boris Karloff, said in an equally successful Bullwinkle moose voice. Spirits are about to speak. Some giggles. Shh, Rachel commanded. Nadine decided that if one of the other 2 girls didn't start moving the planchette soon, so it would spell out whatever silly message they had for her, she would do it herself. Slide it around to spell something short and sweet, like boo, so she could get her assignment and leave. Just as she was about to try doing this, the planchette jerked rudely under her fingers. The pencil left a dark, black, diagonal slash on the fresh page. Hey, no fair yanking, spirits, Rachel said in a vaguely uneasy tone of voice. Did you do that, Nadine? No. Janie? Honestly. The planchette jerked again, almost pulling their fingers from it, and skidded to the upper left-hand corner of the paper. Wowie, Nadine said. Did you feel? They did. All of them did. Although neither Rachel nor Janie Fargood would talk to her about it later. And she had never felt particularly welcome in either girl's room after that night. It was as if they were both a little afraid to get too close. After that, the planchette suddenly began to thrum underneath their fingers. It was like lightly touching the fender of a smooth idling car. The vibration was steady and disquieting. It was not the sort of movement a person could cause without being fairly obvious about it. The girls had grown quiet. Their faces all wore a peculiar expression, an expression common to the faces of all people who have attended a séance where something unexpectedly genuine has occurred. Hold on, my eyes are watering. It's the time of year. Oh, that's what happens when allergies kick your butt. Where something unexpectedly genuine has occurred. When the table began to rock, when unseen knuckles rap on the wall, or when the medium begins to extrude smoky gray teleplasm from her nostrils. It is a pallid, waiting expression, half wanting whatever it is that has begun to stop, half wanting it to go on. It is an expression of dreadful distracted excitement. And when it wears that particular look, the human face looks most like the skull, which always rests half an inch below the skin. Excuse me. Stop it, the horse-faced girl cried out suddenly. Stop it right now, or you'll be sorry. And Jane Fargood screamed in a fear-filled voice, I can't take my fingers off of it. Someone uttered a little burping scream. At the same instant, Nadine realized that her own fingers were also glued to the board. The muscles of her arms bunched in an effort to pull the tips of her fingers from the planchette, and they remained where they are. But they remained where they are. All right, the joke is over, Rachel said in a tight, scared voice. Who? Suddenly the planchette began to write. It moved with lightning speed, dragging their fingers with it, snapping their arms out and back and around in a way which would have been funny if it weren't for the helpless, caught expressions on all three girls' faces. Nadine thought later that it was as if her arms had been caught in an exercise machine. The writing before had been in stilted, dragging letters, messages that looked as if they had been written by a 7-year-old. This writing was smooth and powerful, big, slanting, capital letters with that slashed across the white page. There was something both relentless and vicious about it. Nadine, 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 the whirling planchette wrote. How I love Nadine to be my love, to be my to love my Nadine, to be my queen. If you are pure for me, if you are clean for me, if you are dead for me, dead you are. Planchette swooped, raised, and began again, lower down. You are dead with the rest of them. You are in the dead book with the rest of them. Nadine is dead with them. Nadine is rotten with them. Unless, it stopped, thrummed. Nadine thought, hoped. Oh, how she hoped that it was over. And then it raced back to the edge of the paper and began again. Jane shrieked miserably. The faces of the other girls were shocked white O's of wonder and dismay. The world, soon the world is dead. And we, Nadine, I, we are. Now the letters seemed to scream across the page. We are in the house of the dead, Nadine. The last word howled off across the page in an inch-high capital letters, and then the planchette whirled from the tablet, leaving a long streak of graphite behind in a shroud. Like a shout, it fell to the floor and snapped in two. There had been an instant of shock, immobile silence, and then Jane Fargood had burst into a high weeping hysterics. Thing had ended with the house mother coming upstairs to see what was wrong. Nadine remembered, and she had been about to call the infirmary for Jane when the girl had managed to get hold of herself a little. Through the whole thing, Rachel Timms had sat on her bed, calm and pale. When the house mother and most of the other girls, including Horse-Faced Girl, who undoubtedly felt that the prophetess is without much honor in her own land, had left, she had asked Nadine in a flat, strange voice, who was it, Nadine? I don't know, Nadine had answered truthfully. She hadn't had the slightest idea, not then. You didn't recognize the handwriting? No. Well, maybe you just better take the note from beyond, or whatever it is, and go back to your room. You asked me to sit down, Nadine flashed at her. How was I supposed to know anything like that would happen? I did it to be polite, for God's sake. Rachel had had the good grace to flush at that. She had even offered a little apology, but Nadine had never seen much of the girl after that, and Rachel Timms had been one of the few girls Nadine had ever felt really close to during her first 3 semesters at college. From then until now, she had never touched one of the triangular spiders made of pressed fiberboard. But the time had, well, it had slouched around at last, hadn't it? Yes, indeed. Heart beating loudly, Nadine sat down on the picnic bench, pressed her fingers lightly to two of the planchettes' three sides. She could feel it begin to move under the balls of her fingers almost immediately, and she thought of the car with its engine idling. But who was the driver? Who was he really? Who would climb in and slam the door and put his sun-blackened hands on the wheel? Whose foot, brutal and heavy, shod in the old and dusty cowboy boot, would come down on the accelerator and take her where? Driver, where are you taking us? Nadine, beyond help or hope of succor, sat upright on the bench at the crest of Flagstaff Mountain in the black trench of morning. Her eyes wide, that feeling of being on the border stronger than ever. She stared east, but felt his presence coming from behind her, pressing heavy on her, dragging her down like weights tied to the feet of a dead woman. Flagg's dark presence, coming in steady, exorbitant waves. Somewhere the dark man was abroad in the night, and she spoke two words like an incantation to all the black spirits that had ever been. Incantation and invitation. Tell me. Beneath her fingers, Blanchette began to write. And that is the end of 53, and we shall stop there. We did about an hour and a half if you count the 10 minutes, so that's good. Did I write it down? No, I didn't. So tonight we will do 54. See how that goes. But for now, I shall let you guys go. I am going to go try to find some breakfast. He says I don't think coffee is going to do it. So I hope y'all have a good day. I hope y'all enjoy your Sunday, church and whatnot, whatever you guys are deciding on. And yeah, let us have a wonderful day, shall we? So stay warm, stay cool, wherever you are in the world, and I shall see you guys tonight. Love y'all. Follow if you haven't. Keep up to date, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye.